Hey, what's up you guys? It's Simon. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to Inktober. So today's Inktober is technically day 19, but we're going to be starting this video off, of course, with day 17. So day 17 was an illustration that I've been excited about pretty much since the beginning of Inktober when I was doing these plans, because I instantly had an image in my head of what I wanted this illustration to look like, and I think the end result really did almost exactly match what I had in my head. So I was really thrilled about that. So let's get into that. So this illustration was kind of like a much needed break, I would say, because a lot of the colors that I've been using throughout this Inktober have been either very earthy or very fall or very just kind of muted in general. And I know that Inktober is supposed to be spooky and scary, but there are some color palettes that are pretty neon. So for example, I don't know if you guys have played Gaia or used to play Gaia or whatever, but on Gaia there's a lot of items that have melty something or other in the name. It's always like something melty or melty something. But essentially all that means is that that item is going to consist of black, a lavender, and then like sort of like cyanish minty teal color. And those are always, I would consider to be really spooky items, well, I guess, yeah, spooky items, spooky colors, whatever. If you want to see that in action, actually there is a post on my Instagram. I did like a little artist support post that incorporates those colors, and I think it uses them in a spooky context very well. And that all is to say that I was trying to defend myself using bright colors. However, this illustration is still not very spooky, but that's okay because I think it's really cute. So essentially what we have here, our prompts were gardening and lily pad, and so I instantly thought of a water garden. So, you know, like lots of water, obviously, with lily pads floating on top, maybe some flowers a la Claude Monet. But yeah, I thought it would be really fun to do something like that. And I decided to go with mixed media for this illustration because there were some parts, particularly her hair, her jacket, and her socks, that I thought would look really well just like flat rendered. And then for her skin and the jacket, I figured would be a little bit more rendered. I don't know really what possessed me to imagine it that way, but that's how it ended up turning out. But yeah, so for her hair, I knew it was going to be purple. However, it didn't really turn out the exact shade that I wanted. I was looking for more of a blue toned purple, but with the nature of Poscas and there only being so many colors, it ended up being a little bit more pink than I wanted, and the shading of the purple hair, like for the shadowed ponytail that she has, is definitely a lot darker than I had anticipated, but I still think it looks good, and I still think it definitely complements the pink, which is exactly what I wanted. It was a very like electric pink. I was having a bit of trouble getting it to work just because it was a little bit on the watery side because I don't use that bright pink very often. If you're going to be using a paint marker, I would definitely recommend before using it, if you know that you don't use them often, to shake it up, pump it a few times, swatch it a little bit, and just get it going back to life, because it will be a little bit on the watery side if it's not mixed up and has been setting properly, especially if you store them vertically like I do. But yeah, for the most part, all of the Posca parts turned out exactly how I wanted. And even the skin, as always, Copics are my comfort zone, so they did turn out very well. The only issue I would say I had with this illustration was the water. I'd initially planned for it to be a little more rendered than it actually came out. I kind of last minute, I was planning to do them in Poscas as always, or not Poscas, sorry, Copics as always, and do like a little bit of like some light patches, some dark patches, you know, just really work in that water aspect. But then last minute I decided to go with watercolors because I thought, like, what better to get a water effect than with water. However, the color that I had mixed ended up being a lot darker than I'd anticipated. In fact, it was kind of like a blue-gray, whereas I wanted it to be an actually like brightish sort of blue. So I decided to go over that with Copic markers, and while I do think that that brought in that blue back that I wanted, it did kind of almost completely erase all of the texture that came from the watercolor, so that was a little bit disappointing. But at the same time, I think it still kind of fits because the rest of the illustration isn't crazily rendered. Even her skin, I didn't do my normal like shading around her eyes or the cheek or anything like that. I just did some kind of like subtle, almost shell shading? Cell shading, I would say. So it came out very simple, but in the end, I still really, really like how it turned out. So there is day 17. Alrighty, so getting into day 18, our perfect cottagecore boyfriend. So today's prompt was pretty easy for me because, as we all know, cottagecore has been sweeping across the internet and it is one of the coziest aesthetics I've ever seen. I've always been something, or like, it's always been something that I'm into. Why can't I speak? Always been something that I have been into, but never really had like a word to describe it until now. Apparently I don't have any words to describe it. But anyway, if you can't already tell, our prompts today were fox and warm. So the idea of a little cottagecore type illustration came almost like second nature to me. Warm I chose to interpret both physically and metaphorically, however, with both a warm color palette and a little sweater. So the overall idea was pretty simple. I wanted to draw someone holding a fox, and I ultimately decided to make that someone a boy because I realized I hadn't really drawn a lot of men so far this Inktober, and that also will not change further on in this Inktober. In fact, I think the only boy I've drawn and have drawn since then has been the Mushroom Knight, so I figured it was probably time for another boy. At first I was going to do something a little bit too simple and just draw, again, this item on Gaia that I think I might have made up in my head because I could have sworn I had it in my inventory and I can't remember the name of it, so I can't find it. But essentially it was like this light sort of ivory beige sweater with a white button up underneath and a little fox face on the front of it because, again, I thought it was really cute. But I did, however, feel like that was too simple, so instead I took the coloring from that sweater, and then rather than just slapping a fox on the front, I decided to draw somebody holding the fox instead. So as you guys can see, the coloring was pretty easy for this illustration. It was extremely therapeutic to work on. I decided to work with watercolors to not only push myself, but also, since it was a really large illustration and my Copics have been really struggling with some patchiness lately, I decided I would try it and go with some simple shading rather than complete rendering. And like I said before, I'd already had some inspiration as far as the palette went, but I did struggle a bit when it came to the hair. I had a pretty similar issue with this illustration, ironically, that I did with the Mushroom Knight, in that my first instinct was to go with red hair, but again, similarly with Mushroom Knight, the fox, which is also a central part of the illustration, of course, has a lot of orangey red tones, so I didn't want things to be unbalanced, which is why I decided to go with like a brown color, which I like just as much. I also didn't want him to didn't want to give him red hair because he has freckles, and I didn't want him to end up looking like a Weasley for obvious reasons. Another thing I have to mention was that the fox frustrates me because while the body itself was easy, I'm running into the issue again and again where I'm struggling to get animals to fit into my style. Like I believe I've mentioned in several previous videos, I don't have much trouble drawing animals realistically, but when it comes to trying to sort of like mesh them into my style, I've been having a lot of trouble. I think his face does look a little bit wonky, but it's not as terrible as it could be. It could definitely be better. But yeah, so here is Inktober day 18. One thing I do want to say is with watercolors, I am continuously running into the issue where I do not mix enough paint. So this is most prominent, I think, in his hair and in his shirt, because I'd anticipated for his hair to be a dark brown, and while I do still like this sort of pale brown, I think it definitely should have been a little bit darker to add some more vibrancy and contrast to this illustration. I feel like it almost looks more like a memory, or like the fox just stands out a little bit too much because his hair was so light. I am just thankful that it still fits in with the color palette. And then the same thing with his shirt, I just didn't have enough to spread it throughout the entire thing, so it almost looks like it's shaded with ivory, and it's a white shirt rather than it being an ivory shirt in general. So it did come out a little bit more pastel than I, again, had anticipated, but overall I do think it's a really cute illustration. So here is day 18. So finally, we are getting caught up for today. This is Inktober day 19, and since we are no longer doing like the daily uploads, I do have to tell you guys that I had fully anticipated to title this video, "Why is it spicy?" And I'm sad that I cannot do that anymore. So I just wanted to tell y'all the little thing that I came up with for today's prompt. Anyway, this prompt did throw me for a loop because it went all over the place. So let me explain. During my pre-planning at first, I'd do maybe 2 or 3 at once, but once I got to day 19, I decided to start there and then pre-write all of the prompts in my sketchbook before I actually started working on them, whereas previously I was just writing the prompts as I got to them. And one of the days after today's prompts, which were, of course, foraging and cool, was glow. And my brain completely replaced cool with glow when I was planning this illustration. So my initial plan was to draw a patch of mushrooms that were relatively normal, with like a patch of these odd glowing mushrooms in the middle, and like a basket maybe spilled and filled with mushrooms set beside it, because when I think foraging, I immediately think of mushrooms, and that is mainly because of the movements, which, by the way, if you haven't seen the movements, I would highly recommend you watch it because it's one of the cutest, most relaxing, why can't I speak, most relaxing cartoons that I have ever seen. I personally have not seen the reboot yet, but I really, really want to. It looks really cute. However, the official Movements YouTube channel is releasing like a ton of the old 90s episodes. So like I said, I would highly recommend watching it because you can watch it on YouTube for free. Anyway, I couldn't quite get the angle right for the mushroom patch, and also it wasn't technically the prompt, so I decided to default to a character illustration and have someone inspecting the glowy mushroom. I was kind of going for like a silent shroom vibe. Good lord! Today is literally just me not being able to speak properly. Anyway, I was going for like a silent shroom vibe on Breath of the Wild, and it was at that point, once I was thinking about that, that it finally hit me that I was thinking of the glow prompt and not the cool prompt, so I rushed to fix it. I figured I could keep the initial character illustration that I had, but rather than having it just be glowy, I could make it glow and also be icy, so it would be like a blue glow still, but also have like ice all over like the side of her arm, and eventually her other arm. I didn't plan that, but I will get into it. But also on the side of her cheek. I again used Copics for this illustration, but since I knew I wanted to play with the the lighting to some extent, I tried to do a bit of mixed media by making the ice like sort of a shimmery watercolor. I thought of doing something similar with the Forest Elf prompt from day 10, but also with gel pen. But since I wanted the lighting to be darker than the figure, it didn't quite work. And since the blue was darker than the character, I knew that I could layer them without me having to add too much of the watercolor. I also had fun working with like the sort of icy effect just because that shimmer is really, really beautiful, and I really like seeing how it layers on top of the markers. I wanted it to kind of look like it was like thick, solid ice, or like thin sheets of ice crystals that were almost like snowflakes. So I don't know if it really came across that way, but it at least looks like some form of strange material is now growing across her face. And the reason that I said it went to the other arm was because once again, my Copics were being super patchy, because you're not supposed to use Copics on mixed media paper. Obviously it's possible, but since there's a tooth to it and they are very thick, it's like thick paper, it do be sucking up the juice. So I did I initially planned to use, I think it was G46, which was like the mistletoe color. However, you guys saw that was coming out super patchy. It wasn't quite doing what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to be a very dark green so that it would contrast pretty nicely against the light green of her dress. However, it did not work that way. And then I was looking at my chart again and I realized that there was this kind of dark but sort of still light grayish green color, which was the I think it was BG 18, and I was like, this is perfect. So I layered it on top, and I went over her pinky and her thumb. So I was like, oh, there's no bringing that back. That's a super dark color on my light skin tone or medium skin tone or what have you. Uh, Regardless, the skin tone was lighter than the dark green, so there was no way I was going to be able to push that back. So rather than trying to do that, I tried to make it look like it was a little bit more intentional and spread some more of that glittery watercolor on there. And then I went a little bit crazy making the spirals on the mushroom. But yeah, that is the final illustration for this batch of Inktobers. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm ready for Inktober to be over at this point. I am still having fun with these illustrations, but I'm also constantly thinking about what I want to do when Inktober is over. So, can't wait for that. I probably will be posting like some spooky side illustrations from now on Instagram because I don't really feel like I'm getting like that Halloween itch. I'm not making too much like scary spooky art. I'm not making any vampires. I made a couple witches, but like it could be spookier. It could be spookier, but I'm not about to redo the entirety of Inktober. So I hope you guys are still enjoying these illustrations. I also hope you yourselves are enjoying Inktober and aren't as burnt out as I am. I also want to give a big shout out, as always, to my patrons, Elise Thompson, Duran, Mandy, Schleeps, and Puppy Paws. I'm sorry your last delivery was so caked in fear. I still don't know what fell behind me last time. I wish I knew. Literally nothing was on the floor. I checked with all of my family that was home and around. I was like, hey, did you guys perhaps drop something on the floor a couple minutes ago? Maybe a couple seconds ago? Did you drop anything? And everyone said no. And y'all heard that thunk. Why wasn't there anything on the floor? Freaks me out. But nothing terrifying happened today, so that is good. Anyways, I'm rambling as always. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe because we're still doing uploads every 3 days this month and we're still doing a lot of Inktober content. So if that's your thing, definitely stick around. I'm also going to be doing a ton of fun stuff in November. I have a lot of plans for like some challenges, a kind of spicy video that I'm pretty excited for that I'm going to save until November because obviously Inktober is going to take up all of this month, but I am very excited for this video because this topic does make me a little bit spicy. I'm a little bit angry about it. So I think it's going to be a very fun but important video. So yeah. Anyways, I'm done rambling. I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.